Welcome to the Screener College Basketball Podcast with your hosts, Mike Randle and Gus Kearns.
You can never count out the Syracuse Orange under head coach Jim Boeheim. In his 44 seasons at Syracuse, whether his team came into the NCAA tournament hot or whether they barely snuck in and the entire public said they shouldn't have been in, they always find a way to cause problems. Since they've joined the ACC in the 2013-2014 season, here is how the Orange have performed. Went 28-6, lost in the second round. Went 18-3, didn't make the tournament. Went 23-14, finished ninth in the ACC in 2015-2016, but still made the NCAA Final Four. 19-15 the year after, went to the NIT. 23-14, made the NCAA Sweet 16. Finished 10th in the ACC that year. 20-14, 6th in the ACC, made the NCAA round of 64. And this year they were 18-14. And most people would have said, the Syracuse Orange can't make it in. Only had one starter returning. Didn't have any scholarship seniors on the team. But sure enough, they are coming off a blowout win over North Carolina. A North Carolina team that was finally completely healthy and were ready to play Louisville in a game that no one would have been shocked if they won. But the season ended there. And we won't know how good Syracuse would have been. But we can look back on Jim Boeheim's year and realize that the Orange are always a tough out. They're always long. They can usually shoot the ball. They play that zone defense. And in any one game situation, they can always step up. And in our Screen the Screener season recap series, we're going to look at the Syracuse Orange today with Mike Waters from Syracuse.com and the Post-Standard. Mike is an expert. He's been writing about Syracuse basketball for years. He's president of the United States Basketball Writers Association. You can find him on Twitter at Mike Waters, SYR. Mike joins us and talks about Coach Boeheim, about why he thinks he has many years left, how this team could be pretty strong next year, what he thinks Elijah Hughes is going to do, and what exactly was the turning point in the season where he felt the Orange started to get things together. Syracuse is a dangerous program. They have a unique style. They have a culture. They have a history. And they have a great coach. So we're going to talk to Mike Waters today about Syracuse basketball and give a listen to the insight and the reviews of the past year and why Syracuse next year can be a real dangerous team. Let's bring in Mike Waters from Syracuse.com. The Screen the Screener team recap series rolls on, and today we're going to head to New York and talk to Mike Waters, college basketball writer at Syracuse.com and the Post-Standard. Mike is the president of the U.S. Basketball Writers Association. He covers the Orange. You must follow him on Twitter at Mike Waters, SYR, Syracuse, of course. And he joins us here to recap and preview next year for the Syracuse Orange. Mike, thanks so much for joining us for a few minutes. Are you staying safe? How you doing up there?
We are staying safe. Thanks for asking. We're pretty much working from home, staying in place, only going out for necessities like hitting the grocery store, and only trying to do that about once a week if we can. We're stretching it out. We don't do those little, we're out of one thing, pop in the store. So, and actually, some neighbors just walked by with their dog, and, we rushed out of the house, stood on the front porch while they stood out in the street, and we chatted for a little bit. And that's about as much as you can do socially these days. So we're hanging in there.
That's very true. And that's what we're trying to do here with the team recap series, sort of connect with the fans, give them something to think about. Of course, we didn't have the March Madness. It should have been the Final Four right now. So, of course, it's something where we can get into the teams and preview next year. And coming into this year was an interesting year for the Orange. It was Jim Boeheim's 44th year as head coach at Syracuse, the legend, of course. But they entered this year with no scholarship seniors on the roster for the first time in more than 20 years. They did have to replace the 4 starters. And in the preseason poll, they were predicted 8th, right in the middle there, the ACC. So coming into the year, Mike, what were your thoughts? Unique situation for Jim Boeheim, obviously legendary coach. But what were your thoughts coming in expectations for Syracuse this year?
I didn't have high expectations at all for all the reasons that you just listed there. The losing 4 starters. And especially it wasn't just, any 4 starters. And included in that is Tyus Battle, your leading scorer, O'Shea Brissett, your leading rebounder. Pascal Chukwu, who didn't offer a lot in terms of offense, but at 7'2" and really long, took up a lot of space in the zone. Convinced a lot of people maybe they shouldn't drive to the basket just because of his height and his length in there. So they were really starting over and almost starting from scratch. The only returning starter is Elijah Hughes. And beyond that, they had some guys that were juniors like Marek Dolezaj and Barama Sidibe, but Marek had played a little bit in his first 2 years and gotten some starts. So he had some experience, but Barama had been hampered by injuries, hadn't played a whole heck of a lot. And especially hadn't developed a lot because of the injuries. So they were going to rely on a lot of young kids, some untested kids, especially the backcourt was going to be new. And the thing that was really going to affect the team, and when you were looking at okay, how are they going to do? You thought they were going to get good at some point, but the early schedule was not one that you would recommend for a team that's just lost 4 starters and has no scholarship seniors on the roster. They were going to play a lot of tough games early on, Iowa, at Georgetown. They were going to go to New York and play Oklahoma State and Penn State, which we didn't know at the time. Penn State turned out to be pretty darn good this season.
Absolutely.
So having to play them on a neutral court, they had a really tough early schedule, and they could not get over the hump in any of those games. They lost every single one of the what you would consider the key or important games. Now they managed to keep their heads above water barely by not losing any really bad ones, but they struggled. November, December was a real struggle for a young developing team.
Yeah, and I remember watching several games this year. There's always a feeling for me that Syracuse can get on a roll, and it's going to happen. They have a unique style. Boeheim is an excellent X&O coach. And middle of the year, I remember the key turning point, like you said, they had a struggling non-conference. Then they get into the conference there. They lose their first 2 games. They lost the one to Virginia to start the year, of course. Then when things got going, beat Virginia Tech. Then the 2 games in January, home against Notre Dame, home against Virginia Tech. So they're 1-3, and they're headed down to play Tony Bennett in Virginia, who already beat them pretty handily in the first game. And they come back and win that game in overtime. That put them on a 5-game winning streak after that. I remember watching that game. Very impressive, because even though Virginia wasn't at the level it was at last year, they're still playing very well. They're tough at home, and they had beaten Syracuse in that first game.
Yeah, when you said that they're 1-3, in the ACC after those home losses to Notre Dame and Virginia Tech, those home losses are tough to overcome. And we really were wondering, okay, where's the team going to go? They have no seniors. Who's going to step up and be the leader? Who's going to calm these young kids and let them know everything's going to be okay and stick with it? And they managed to hang in there, and they got better. And they didn't get a lot better, but they got just enough of an improvement out of a few guys, and especially just as a whole defensively, they got just enough improvement to turn around and take early season losses to Virginia and Virginia Tech and Notre Dame, all 3 of which had been at home. And they turned around and they beat all 3 of them in that 5-game stretch that you're talking about. They won at Virginia Tech, and at Notre Dame. Now, they didn't win by much. It was an overtime win at Virginia. They barely survived a last-second shot at both Notre Dame and Virginia Tech. So they were squeaking out the wins, but they were turning home losses in the road. And that really said a lot about the team at that point. They didn't give up on the season. They found a way to hang in there. And did they become great? Was there this massive improvement that we've seen at other Syracuse teams at some point in the season, where all of a sudden, like the 2016 team kicks it into gear and they can make a Final Four run, or that 2018 team that went from the first 4 to the Sweet 16? No, we didn't see that. But we did see a young team that was getting beat up there for a little bit and suffering some losses, and how they managed to hang in and just find a few areas where they could get better. And that was enough to turn some losses into wins.
Yes, and that they got into the end of the year, like you said, up and down, up and down. That was an impressive win against North Carolina in the ACC tournament. And I do a pod for Action Network, and we had sort of talked about dark horses in each of the major conference tournaments. And I identified Syracuse because I think they're unique. I think that they are well coached, obviously. They would have played Louisville, okay, which I understand, and Louisville played very well, beat them 90-66 at home there against Syracuse when they played earlier this year. But if they get by that game, they end up playing the winner of Notre Dame, Virginia. So they avoided Duke. They avoided Florida State. I think they could have made some noise here, and it certainly started with what was an impressive one. I understand that North Carolina had a down year, but Cole Anthony was back. They had won their opening round game, and an 81-53 win over North Carolina when they had all their players was really impressive.
Yeah, they beat a North Carolina team that less than 2 weeks earlier had come up to the Carrier Dome and beat them pretty easily. Yeah, I think it was like a 13, 14-point win here at the Carrier Dome. And North Carolina just seemed to have all the parts necessary to attack the zone and attack it well. They had the inside guys, especially a veteran guy, or at least in this day and age, he's a veteran, Garrison Brooks, who's playing exceptionally well throughout the ACC. I think in ACC play alone, I think he wound up like second in the league in scoring, or top 5 in scoring and top 5 in rebounding. So a heck of a player that can go from high post to low post and give Syracuse problems inside. And they shot the three. North Carolina did at the Carrier Dome. Cole Anthony had a heck of a day. Some of the other kids that were able to come in and play. The Keeling kid, the grad transfer, was a problem for Syracuse. So able to score out both outside and inside and move the ball. Man, you're like, how in the world is Syracuse going to go to Greensboro, where it's like 80, 90% North Carolina fans in the stands there, and how are they going to go and beat this team? And they not only beat them, they destroyed them. And right from the get-go, it was they throttled them, and it was shocking. Now, could they do it again 24 hours later against a very good Louisville team? A very good Louisville team. I'm not sure. But they were building confidence in themselves. They really did believe in themselves. They called it the revenge tour for a while, taking all these teams that had beaten them at home and going on the road and knocking them off. And North Carolina was just the latest, and as it turned out, the last one that they lost to at home, and then went and beat on the road. And yeah, they didn't beat them in Chapel Hill, but they beat them in Greensboro, which is almost the same thing. So a dangerous team. You hated to see the season end for them because it would have been interesting.
Yep.
You had them pegged. You're like, hey, they get by Louisville, all bets are off.
Yep.
And who knows? And yeah, they have kind of become the March team that nobody wants to see.
Yeah.
If you haven't seen the zone, if you're not prepared for it, you don't want to see it unless you're just perfectly matched up for it. But it's a shame. But it was a young team that I think did develop over the course of the season. And even late in the season, we were seeing some guys, and we can get into some of the individuals that were playing better down the stretch.
Yep. And I remember the game against Michigan State a couple of years ago in the tournament with Miles Bridges. I mean, that's the type of memory that's etched in my head. Let's turn to those players right now. So certainly, since it was a young team this year, I would think there's some solid expectations for next year. But of course, the question is going to be with Elijah Hughes, who really had a very strong end of the season, pumping in multiple 20-plus point games down the stretch here. So talk about the players coming back. Talk about Hughes. I know you get peppered in your column there, Mike's mailbox, which is fantastic. So just talk about the insight. And I think people must be optimistic for next year for the Orange.
People's expectations kind of depend on their own viewpoint. And some people are a little bit negative about this past season because at 18-14, it's not your typical Syracuse year. And it got off to such a horrible start. A lot of people were jumping off the bandwagon late in the season. A few of them were trying to get back on. But, largely, it depends on how you viewed this season. Do you view it as like a young team got better, and if they end up losing Elijah Hughes, they're losing only one key guy? And, so you expect guys like Barama Sidibe, Joe Girard, Buddy Boeheim, even a Marek Dolezaj, you expect all these guys to get better. And, some of the other kids that didn't get quite as much playing time, but like Quincy Guerrier as a freshman showed a lot of potential. What could he do next year as a sophomore if he gets more playing time? Jesse Edwards, the almost 7-foot freshman center, didn't get a lot of time this year. But they liked his development. So, some people are looking at next year saying, wow, they could be a lot better. Other people, and I might actually tend towards this group, some of the problems that this team had, especially defensively, how are they getting better? Because, like your backcourt of Joe Girard and Buddy Boeheim, they're not getting taller. They're not getting more athletic. They're not getting quicker. I thought they played pretty well defensively, or as well as they could this past year. So if that's still your starting backcourt, are you still going to be a little weak defensively compared to some Syracuse teams of recent years, like, the Frank Howard, Tyus Battle backcourt, the Michael Carter Williams, Brandon Trish backcourt in 2013. the Michael Benachet, Trevor Cooney backcourt that took him to the Final Four in 2016 was an underrated but really good defensively backcourt. I think Trevor was about 6'4", 6'5". Michael Benachet was 6'6". So, they're going to have to work to get better defensively. But, we'll see. And they are almost undoubtedly. I mean, I guess there's still a chance that Elijah could come back. He's only testing the process right now. It's such an uncertain time in the world, including the NBA and the draft and what's going to happen. Maybe there's a better chance of Elijah coming back than there was because of all this stuff. But if they lose him, they're losing a really good player, a guy who is, for me, an easy all-ACC first-team pick. He did so much for this team. He probably did more for this team than any other player in the league did for his, because I saw some other guys that made all-ACC, and if they had a down game, their teams would still win. That didn't happen too much for Syracuse. If they lost, in fact, the two games where Elijah got hurt, NC State at home and on the road against a really bad Miami team, Syracuse couldn't win. They could not win without Elijah Hughes, so they're going to have to figure out a way to win without him next year if he does indeed stay in the NBA draft.
He is the type of guy, Mike, that I really think should come back. He was not on any of the ACC preseason teams, first or second, but had 25 consecutive games of double-figure scoring. Like you said, the 2 games he got injured, very difficult for Syracuse, so important to them. But when he was rolling here, just looking at the last 2 weeks of the season, 25 points against Florida State, 25 points against Pitt, 28 points against BC, 27 points in the win in the tournament over North Carolina. I agree. I think he should come back. I never know, family situations. I understand that. But this is the type of player who absolutely is going to be one of the best players in the ACC if he chooses to come back. And maybe not having the ability to go to a combine and have to do everything virtually, maybe he says, you know what, I'd like to come back and play for a really solid team.
Yeah, the lack of a combine, the lack of being able to go and work out individually with teams prevents somebody like an Elijah Hughes or any player that's either projected right now as second round or maybe undrafted. It prevents them from raising their draft stock after the season has ended. And, I think Elijah is the type of guy who probably would have been able to do that. If he gets to go to the combine and he gets to go to some workouts, I think some teams are going to be surprised. And I think they would, raise their ranking of him, where they might select him in the draft. I've been hearing he's a second round type of guy. The thing with Elijah is he's like 22 now, and he's going to be finishing up his degree this semester. So it's not like you can say, oh, well, go back to school and finish your degree. He's got his degree. So it's like, okay, if you have your degree and you're of a certain age, even if you maybe don't make the NBA, maybe you just feel like it's that time in your life where you're ready to move on from college and make money playing basketball. And whether that's in the NBA or the CBA or overseas, you just want to get on with your life. And there are definitely, guys that have come through Syracuse, and I've seen, guys at other schools too, where they're at that moment. And it's an okay decision to make. But I agree with you. If he comes back, he could be in line for an incredible senior season. The question is will he actually be able to raise his draft stock with another year? Because how much more can he do to impress NBA scouts than he did this past season?
And recruiting is always not a problem for Syracuse, of course. In college, I ended up running track. I was up at the Carrier Dome a couple times, got to run there. I mean, just an electric place. And of course, next year already, a couple early recruits have signed. 4-star Kadari Richmond from New Hampshire has signed, and that's a 6'5", 175-pound guard there, combo guard. Woody Nelson from Mount Zion Prep down in Maryland, 3-star. So what are you hearing about on the horizon? I saw in the mailbox there, we know Aaron Estrada down from New Jersey from St. Peter's. Real nice player. He was the MAC Freshman of the Year, but you're hearing that he may not be a player that is going to end up in Syracuse. But talk about the players coming in and what you're hearing so far.
Yeah, Kadari Richmond's an interesting guy. He's about 6'5". Some people are saying he's growing still and, could end up being about 6'6", but he's a backcourt guy. He's athletic. He's long. Kind of gives them a look that they don't have right now with Buddy Boeheim and Joe Girard. He's actually from New York City originally. He's up in New Hampshire at Brewster Academy just for his prep school year. And so, it's that New York connection again, for Syracuse. They're tapping into the Big Apple, and they really like him. They feel like he's been kind of a little bit under the radar. And he's a type of guy who's going to be able to come in and help both defensively, add some aggressiveness offensively. Well, I don't know exactly how good of a shooter he is, not having seen him in person. And you have to be able to shoot in order to get on the floor for Jim Boeheim, especially these days. You need to be able to be an offensive threat. There used to be a time before the emphasis on the 3-point shot really went crazy. Thank you, Golden State Warriors. But there used to be a time when Syracuse or anybody, you could put out 2 shooters on the floor and you'd be okay. You can't do that anymore. You have to have guys who can help you spread the floor and take advantage of defenses and pull people away from the basket and make them work. Teams do that to Syracuse against the zone. And so we'll see where Kadary goes. Woody Newton, your typical Syracuse forward, 6'8", long, athletic, really athletic. They think they found another one, and it'll be really interesting. I mean, they have Marek Dolezaj, they have Quincy Guerrier. Marek's obviously going to have one forward spot nailed down in the starting lineup. Quincy played really well off the bench this past season at times, struggled at others, especially defensively. He didn't show his 3-point shot this year. He didn't shoot many. He didn't make many. But I've seen him in practice, and Quincy can shoot the ball. Now, can he make the jump in just 1 year from a guy who couldn't and wouldn't make shots in games to a guy who can be a reliable shooter? I'm not sure. That's a big jump, but he's definitely going to be more of a threat than he was as a freshman. Woody Newton comes in. I've heard people compare him to former Syracuse players like Jeremy Grant because of his athleticism.
Wow.
But they also say he can score for you. That he can shoot. So, but he'll be in that forward mix with also a redshirt sophomore in Robert Braswell will be in that mix. And Robert's an interesting guy to watch. Redshirted this past year because of a soreness in his shins that they never could quite figure out. But they're hoping that he's going to be healthy and ready to go. He is a fantastic 3-point shooter. And if they get in a situation where they're in need of 3-point shooting, I could see Robert Braswell getting some playing time next season.
Yeah, Braswell, a limited sample set, but this year, 66% from 3-point range. So you certainly see that. Mike, one more question, then we'll get you out of here. Ken, thank you for a few minutes here. This is great insight into Syracuse, and of course, a lot of things that you cover in the mailbox and what you do a great job up there at Syracuse.com. Jim Boeheim. So 44 years. This is going to be his 45th. We're outside here in the East Coast, but we're on the outside. Always heard that Mike Hopkins was going to take over for him, right? And then Mike goes out, ends up taking the job at Washington. So what do you think? I mean, is he just rolling along? Do you think the end is coming soon? Or what are you hearing from Jim? I mean, just a fantastic coach, legendary job at Syracuse, but certainly 45 years, that's a long time. Do you have any insight, or do you think it's just taking it year by year? But it seemed like a few years ago, at least to me, he was possibly going to, retire soon, but then all of a sudden he's back, and it seems like he's rolling along like he's 30 years old.
Yeah, when Mike Hopkins left after the 2017 season, it was supposed to be 1 year after that Jim Boeheim was going to step aside, retire, and Mike Hopkins was going to take over. But when Hopkins left in 2017, it threw that whole succession plan right out the window. And ever since then, they've had no plan that they've discussed publicly. And Jim has said, whenever asked, ever since then, I'm not thinking about retirement. I haven't thought about it. Why are you asking? Well, we know why we're asking. He's been the oldest Division I coach ever for like the last 3 years.
Wow.
And he's not stopping. So he's keeps setting that record, establishing it higher and higher. His son Buddy is going to be a junior next year. A lot of people had theorized for a while, he'll coach Buddy through the end of Buddy's career. But he hasn't said that. And he keeps saying he's going to keep coaching as long as he feels good and feels healthy and feels like he can do it. And, they got a commitment earlier this year from, one of the top players in the class of 22, Dior Johnson. Well, you think Jim Boeheim's walking away from like his highest rated recruit since Carmelo Anthony?
Wow.
And Dior would come in the year after Buddy graduates. So I don't think he's I believe him when he says he's not thinking about retirement. Now, listen, nobody really knows when, other things could say, no, it's time for you to stop, health or family situation. You never know. But, I believe him when he says he's not thinking about it. And the athletic director here, John Wildhack, he's not talking. I've asked him, so what's going on? Is there an heir apparent like there was with Hop, and there's not? And, could it come from the next hire come from outside the Syracuse family? It could. I don't know. But I guess we're all just going to have to sit back and wait and see. When Jim Boeheim was about 60, 65, somewhere in there, people used to ask me, when do you think Jim's going to retire? And I used to say, one day after I do. And more as the years go on, I think I might have been right. I think the guy's going to outlast me. So yes, the one thing I've never had to do here in Syracuse, I've covered the team for over 30 years. I've never covered a coaching search.
Yeah, for sure. Very true. Very true.
And I've got friends covering other teams who have done like 8 of them.
Well, listen, with that recruit coming in and his son, like you said, I don't think he's going anywhere anytime soon. But certainly, Mike Waters, folks, amazing, amazing job. College basketball writer at Syracuse.com, the Post-Standard, president of the United States Basketball Writers Association. Huge job, legendary writer here. Can't thank him enough for a few minutes. Follow him on Twitter at Mike Waters, SYR. Mike, thanks so much. We'll see what's going to go on with Hughes. And of course, Syracuse, always a tough out. Even this year, where they were young, didn't have the scholarship players coming in that they normally do, they were playing great basketball at the end of the year. So we thank you for a few minutes, and listen, stay safe up there and keep growing the beard.
Yeah, we'll see when my wife finally objects to this folly. But yeah, boredom takes over. So anyway, listen, it's been a pleasure talking to basketball with you. I appreciate it. Thanks, and you and everybody else out there, stay safe and be well.
Candle